The first time Rachel Donovan noticed the unfamiliar silver Audi in her driveway, she assumed it was a simple mistake. A visitor to the neighborhood, perhaps, who had misunderstood the layout of Oakwood Court's winding streets and cul-de-sacs. Rachel, a 34-year-old graphic designer who had purchased her modest colonial just 6 months ago, had spent the morning in her favorite cafe completing a deadline project and returned home to find the vehicle parked at a jaunty angle, taking up the left half of her concrete driveway. "Excuse me," Rachel called, peering through the Audi's windows to see if anyone was inside. Finding it empty, she sighed and wheeled her bike around to the garage, deciding it wasn't worth making a fuss over. The car would be gone soon enough, its driver no doubt embarrassed upon realizing their error. But the car wasn't gone an hour later, or 3 hours later. Rachel worked from her home office, occasionally glancing out the window at the persistent intruder. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across her lawn, her irritation grew in proportion. At 5:17 p.m., just as Rachel was considering calling a tow service, she heard car doors slamming outside. From her second-floor window, Rachel watched a woman in an expensive-looking cream pantsuit striding up the sidewalk next door. Behind her trailed a teenage boy with headphones clamped over his ears, his eyes never leaving his phone. The woman fumbled with keys at the front door of the house directly adjacent to Rachel's. "You've got to be kidding me," Rachel muttered. The house next door had been vacant for over 2 months. Rachel had actually appreciated the buffer of empty space between her home and the rest of the neighborhood. It had given her time to settle in, to establish her routines without immediately navigating new neighborly relationships. Now it appeared that era of peaceful anonymity was over. Rachel marched downstairs and out her front door, crossing the strip of grass that separated their properties. The woman was now unloading grocery bags from the Audi's trunk. "Hi there," Rachel called, forcing a smile. "I'm Rachel Donovan. Looks like you're moving in next door." The woman glanced up, her expression briefly blank before a polite smile appeared. "Diane Westfield. Yes, we closed on the house last week, but today's moving day." She gestured vaguely toward the house. "My son, Tyler." The teenager didn't look up from his phone. "Well, welcome to Oakwood Court," Rachel said, still maintaining her smile while nodding pointedly at the Audi. "I actually wanted to mention, your car is parked in my driveway." Diane's manicured eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, is that a problem?" The question caught Rachel off guard. Was it a problem? Of course it was a problem. It was her driveway. "Well, yes," Rachel said carefully. "I may need to go out again later, and It's just for today," Diane interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "The moving truck took up all the space in front of our house, and the HOA is quite strict about street parking. I'll move it in an hour or so." Before Rachel could respond, Diane thrust a grocery bag into her son's hands and guided him toward their front door, effectively ending the conversation. Rachel stood rooted to the spot, feeling oddly as if she'd just been outmaneuvered in a game she hadn't realized she was playing. She watched as Diane and Tyler disappeared into their new home, leaving the Audi firmly ensconced in her driveway. "Right, welcome to the neighborhood," Rachel muttered to herself, turning back toward her own house. She tried to shake off her unease, telling herself she was overreacting. After all, movie day was stressful. Diane had probably just been preoccupied with logistics and hadn't meant to be dismissive. Still, as Rachel resumed her work, she couldn't help but feel that this brief encounter had set an unsettling tone. The Audi, visible from her office window, seemed less like a vehicle and more like a silver harbinger of complications to come. She had no idea just how right she was. 3 weeks after Diane Westfield and her son moved in next door, Rachel had developed a new morning routine. She'd wake up, make coffee, and look out her kitchen window to check if the silver Audi was parked in her driveway. Most days it was. The first few times it happened after moving day, Rachel had marched next door to politely but firmly request that Diane move her car. Each encounter followed the same bewildering script. Diane would act surprised that Rachel was bothered, make a vague excuse about convenience or the HOA rules, and reluctantly move the vehicle, only to park it in Rachel's driveway again the following day. After the fifth such conversation, Rachel had asked directly, "Diane, why do you keep parking in my driveway when I've repeatedly asked you not to?" Diane had adjusted her designer sunglasses and smiled with the patience one might show a difficult child. "Rachel, in planned communities like Oakwood Court, certain spaces function as community property. The developers designed these homes with shared access in mind." "That's not true," Rachel had replied, dumbfounded. "My driveway is on my property. It's in my deed." "Well," Diane had sighed, "that's your interpretation. I've been on 3 HOA boards, and I understand how these neighborhoods actually function versus what's written in some paperwork." Now, on this crisp autumn morning, Rachel stared at the Audi gleaming in her driveway and felt her blood pressure rising. She had a 9:30 a.m. client meeting across town, and Diane's car was blocking her garage door. Rachel grabbed her phone and called the number Diane had reluctantly provided after their third confrontation. The call went straight to voicemail. She sent a text. "Your car is blocking my garage. I have an important meeting. Please move it immediately." 20 minutes and 3 unanswered texts later, Rachel was pacing her living room, calculating how late she would be if she called a rideshare. That's when she noticed Diane strolling down the sidewalk in athletic wear, wireless earbuds visible, a takeout coffee cup in hand. Rachel burst through her front door. "Diane, I've been trying to reach you. You need to move your car right now." Diane removed one earbud, her expression mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Good morning to you too, Rachel. I have a meeting. Your car is blocking my garage. I've texted you multiple times." "Oh, I've been at my Pilates class," Diane said, gesturing with her coffee cup. "I silence my phone during wellness activities. Mental health is so important when you think." Rachel struggled to maintain her composure. "I need you to move your car. Now." Of course, Diane said, fishing her keys from her jacket pocket. "Though I do wish you would plan ahead better. If you mentioned yesterday that you needed the full driveway today, I could have made arrangements." Rachel was momentarily speechless. The audacity of suggesting Rachel should schedule the use of her own driveway was breathtaking. She watched as Diane casually sauntered to the Audi, taking a leisurely sip of coffee before unlocking the door. Later that afternoon, after barely making it to her client meeting on time, Rachel found herself researching property laws and HOA regulations. The planned community of Oakwood Court did indeed have an HOA, but when Rachel called the president, Martin Greeley, he seemed perplexed by Diane's claims. "Shared driveways? No, that's not a thing in Oakwood," Martin said. "Every house has its own driveway on its own property. Has she shown you something that says otherwise?" "She claims to have extensive HOA experience," Rachel replied. Martin chuckled. "Well, I've been president here for 8 years, and I've never heard of her. New residents are required to register with the HOA within 30 days. We haven't received anything from a Diane Westfield." After hanging up, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, turning this new information over in her mind. What exactly was Diane's game? Was this just about convenient parking, or was something else going on? The mystery deepened the following day when Rachel arrived home to find not only Diane's Audi in her driveway, but a large delivery truck as well. Workers were unloading what appeared to be an enormous television into Diane's house, through Rachel's driveway and across her lawn. As Rachel watched in disbelief, she spotted Tyler, Diane's son, sitting on her front steps, his attention fixed on his phone as usual. "Hey, Tyler," Rachel said, approaching cautiously. "Is your mom around?" The teenager glanced up briefly. "She's at work." "Do you know why these deliverymen are using my driveway? And my lawn?" Tyler shrugged. "Mom said it was fine. Something about community access." He returned his attention to his phone, clearly uninterested in the conversation. Rachel studied the boy for a moment. There was something in his dismissive attitude that, "So you're telling me this woman just creates neighborhood conflicts wherever she goes?" Eli asked, leaning against Rachel's kitchen counter. A close friend since college and now a paralegal at a local law firm, Eli had stopped by with takeout after hearing the exasperation in Rachel's voice during their phone call. "I don't know for sure," Rachel said, pushing her half-eaten pad thai around its container. "But after talking to Tyler, I did some digging online." She opened her laptop and turned it toward Eli. The screen displayed a community Facebook group from a neighborhood called Lakeside Estates in a town 40 miles away. "This is from 2 years ago," Rachel explained, scrolling to a post with dozens of comments. A homeowner complaining about a neighbor who kept using their boat dock without permission, claiming it was communal property according to some unwritten neighborhood tradition. "Let me guess, Diane Westfield." The post doesn't name names, but several commenters refer to a DJ who moved away suddenly after complaints escalated. Rachel clicked to another tab. And here's a neighborhood newsletter from 3 years before that, from a place called Meridian Heights. There's a notice about unauthorized use of a community garden plot with a reminder that private property boundaries must be respected despite recent claims by certain residents. Eli frowned. "That's circumstantial. Could be coincidence." "Maybe. But I'd also found this." Rachel opened a third tab showing a small claims court record. Diane Westfield was sued 4 years ago by someone named Patricia Gallagher for property damage. The case was dismissed when Diane moved out of jurisdiction. Eli straightened, his legal interest peaked. "Okay, that's a pattern. But what's her endgame? Why deliberately antagonize neighbors over petty boundary issues?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted, "but it's escalating. Yesterday, I caught her gardener pruning branches from my maple tree. When I confronted him, he said Mrs. Westfield said it was fine since the tree creates shade for both properties." Eli snorted. "That's not how tree law works. At all." "And this morning," Rachel stopped, her face flushing with renewed anger. This morning I found a lawn chair and small table set up on the corner of my backyard. When I texted Diane about it, she replied that she was establishing a peaceful reading nook in the community green space. Your private backyard is not a community green space, Eli said flatly. Obviously. But when I pointed that out, she sent back a laughing emoji and the message. Definitions can be so limiting, don't you think? Rachel stood abruptly and began pacing. I feel like I'm going crazy. She gaslights me at every turn, making me seem unreasonable for wanting basic property boundaries respected. And she's so confident about it. Classic DRVO technique, Eli observed. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's a manipulation tactic. But why? What does she get out of this? Eli tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the counter. Some people feed on conflict, or maybe there's a financial angle we're not seeing. A sudden knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Rachel tensed, half expecting to find Diane claiming her living room as a community meeting space. Instead, a middle-aged man in a UPS uniform stood on her porch with a large package. Delivery for Westfield, he announced. That's next door, Rachel corrected, pointing to Diane's house. The delivery man checked his handheld device. Nope, address says here, but recipient name is Westfield. Rachel stared at the package. The label clearly showed her address, but with Diane's name. She's having packages delivered to my house now? Rachel said incredulously. After refusing the delivery and sending the confused UPS driver to Diane's actual address, Rachel returned to the kitchen, where Eli was already typing on his laptop. I think I know what's happening, he said grimly. There are cases of people establishing adverse possession claims this way. Adverse what? Adverse possession. It's an old legal concept where someone can technically claim ownership of property if they openly use it for a certain period of time without the owner's permission, but also without effective opposition. Rachel's stomach dropped. She's trying to steal parts of my property. The legal threshold for adverse possession is high, Eli cautioned. In this state, it requires continuous use for over 20 years. But he hesitated. But what? There are people who try to establish a foothold, then use the situation to force financial settlements. They don't actually expect to gain the property through adverse possession, but they make such a nuisance of themselves that the property owner might pay them to stop or to go away. Rachel sank into a chair. That's extortion. The manila envelope that arrived in Rachel's mailbox 2 weeks later bore the letterhead of Prescott and Haves, attorneys at law. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it at her kitchen table. Inside was a formal letter that made her blood run cold. Dear Ms. Donovan, this firm represents Diane Westfield in the matter of property line discrepancies affecting parcels 35A and 36A of Oakwood Court. Our client has commissioned a professional survey which indicates significant encroachment of your driveway, eastern lawn area, and rear maple tree on the property legally belonging to our client. The letter went on to generously offer a formal easement agreement that would allow Rachel to continue using Mrs. Westfield's property in exchange for a reasonable accommodation fee of $200 per month, plus a one-time administrative settlement of $5,000. Rachel immediately called Eli. She actually did it, Rachel said, her voice shaking with anger. She's claiming parts of my property are hers and demanding I pay her to use my own driveway. Don't panic, Eli said. This is exactly what we anticipated. Have you been documenting everything like we discussed? Yes. Photos, videos, screenshots of texts, a log of every interaction. Rachel had been meticulous, following both Ellie's advice and Tyler's warning. Good. And what about that home inspection report from when you bought the house? Did you find it? Rachel shuffled through the stack of papers she gathered on her dining room table. Yes, it clearly shows the property lines matching my deed. Perfect. And the HOA president. Martin's been incredibly helpful, Rachel confirmed. He's provided copies of the original development plans and a statement confirming the HOA recognizes my property boundaries as recorded in the county records. Then you're in good shape for the next step, Eli said, which is getting your own lawyer. I've already spoken to Caroline Wu at my firm. She specializes in property disputes and is willing to meet with you tomorrow. The meeting with Caroline Wu left Rachel feeling both reassured and unsettled. The attorney was confident that Diane's claims were baseless, but warned that such disputes could become protracted and expensive. Even with her frivolous claims, she can tie this up in legal proceedings for months, Caroline explained. My concern is that this may be your strategy, create enough legal headaches that you'll eventually pay her to go away. I won't, Rachel said firmly. This is my home. I'm not paying her a penny to use my own property. Caroline smiled. Good, that's the attitude we need. Now I'm going to draft a response to this ridiculous letter. In the meantime, continue documenting everything and avoid direct confrontation if possible. That proved difficult the very next day when Rachel arrived home to find a surveyor placing stakes along a line that cut through the middle of her driveway. Diane stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with evident satisfaction. Rachel parked on the street and approached carefully, phone in hand, already recording. "What's going on here?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice level. "Just marking the correct property line," Diane replied smoothly, "as established by a professional survey." The surveyor, a young man who looked uncomfortable with the situation, avoided eye contact. "May I ask which company you're with?" Rachel asked him directly. Before he could answer, Diane stepped between them. "That's not necessary. He's doing work for me on my property." "Actually," Rachel countered, "he appears to be placing stakes on my property, and I'd like to know his credentials." The surveyor glanced between the two women, then sighed. "Look, I was hired to mark according to these coordinates." He held up a paper. "I don't get involved in disputes." "May I see those coordinates?" Rachel asked. The man hesitated, then handed her the paper. Rachel took a photo of it with her phone. "Thank you," she said politely. "I'll be sharing this with my attorney in the county surveyor's office." The man paled slightly. "The county surveyor?" Rachel nodded. "Yes. Caroline Wu is filing a request for an official county determination tomorrow. They'll want to know who's been placing unauthorized survey markers." The surveyor quickly gathered his equipment. "Mrs. Westfield, I think we should pause this job until the property lines are officially clarified." Diane's composure cracked for the first time. "I'm paying you to complete a job, not to make legal judgments. And I'm telling you there's a dispute that needs resolution before I continue," he replied firmly. "I'm not risking my license." After the surveyor departed, Diane turned to Rachel, her practiced smile replaced with a cold stare. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be," she said. "A simple monthly arrangement would have been the economical choice. Now we'll both incur legal fees." The community room of the Oakwood Court HOA building was packed beyond capacity. Homeowners filled every chair, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. At the front of the room, Martin Greeley, HOA president, called the emergency meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "As you know from the email, we're addressing serious concerns about predatory real estate practices affecting our community." Rachel sat in the front row, surrounded by a support team. Eli, attorney Caroline Wu, a representative from the county prosecutor's office, and most surprisingly, Tyler Westfield, who sat straight-backed but visibly nervous. Conspicuously absent was Diane Westfield herself, despite having been formally invited to the meeting. Her empty chair seemed to accuse her more loudly than words could. "Before we begin," Martin continued, "I want to thank Rachel Donovan for bringing this matter to our attention and for her diligence in protecting not just her property, but potentially many others in our community." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Over the past week, Rachel had discovered she wasn't Diane's only target in Oakwood Court. 3 other homeowners had received similar letters claiming property line discrepancies and demanding payments. Caroline Wu approached the podium. "Good evening. I'm Caroline Wu, representing Ms. Donovan and now also Mr. and Mrs. Chen from Willow Lane and Dr. Patel from Oakwood Circle. I'll outline the situation briefly before Detective Harrigan speaks." Using a presentation displayed on the wall screen, Caroline methodically explained Diane Westfield's scheme: move into a neighborhood, create boundary disputes with multiple neighbors, provide falsified surveys, threaten expensive legal action, and extract settlements from those unwilling or unable to fight back. Based on evidence we gathered, Ms. Westfield has executed this scheme in at least 7 communities across 4 states over the past decade, Caroline explained. The total estimated financial impact exceeds $300,000 in fraudulent settlements and property devaluations. Gasps and angry mutters fill the room. "And now," Caroline said, "Tyler Westfield would like to make a statement." A hush fell over the room as Tyler approached the podium. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "I've been part of my mother's schemes since I was 12 years old," he began. "Not willingly, but I was there. I saw what happened to the people she targeted. I saw what it did to them, especially the older ones who couldn't fight back." Tyler described how Diane had perfected her approach over the years, becoming more sophisticated with each new neighborhood. He explained how she selected targets, how she falsified documents, how she manipulated local regulations. "I kept records," Tyler said, his voice catching. "At first, I didn't know why. Maybe I thought someday I could make it right. When we moved here and she started on Ms. Donovan's property, something just broke in me. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Detective Harrigan took the podium next. The weathered police officer's presence brought a new gravity to the proceedings. Based on the evidence provided by Mr. Westfield and gathered through our investigation, the county prosecutor's office has filed multiple charges against Diane Westfield, including fraud, extortion, falsification of documents, and criminal conspiracy. A collective gasp swept through the room. Ms. Westfield is taken into custody this morning, Detective Harrigan continued. Search warrants executed at her residence and storage unit uncovered extensive evidence supporting the charges, including falsified property documents for several homes in this community that she had targeted for future action. The detective turned to address Rachel directly. Ms. Donovan, your thorough documentation was instrumental in building this case. Without your persistence, this scheme might have continued indefinitely. The meeting continued with discussions of legal implications, resource sharing for potential victims, and community support initiatives. Throughout it all, Rachel found herself watching Tyler, who sat quietly after his statement, looking simultaneously relieved and lost. When the formal meeting concluded, Rachel approached him. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "That took incredible courage." Tyler nodded, avoiding her gaze. "I should have done it sooner, before she hurt so many people." "You're doing it now," Rachel said firmly. "That's what matters." "I never know what happens next," Tyler admitted. "I'm supposed to start college in the fall, but all our money—" He trailed off. Eli stepped forward. "The DA mentioned they're establishing a victim restitution fund, and there are resources for witnesses who cooperate with prosecution."